These are your solutions to the equations and inequalities review sheet. Be sure that you're using a grading pen. With that grading pen, you're going to fill in all of the correct steps to any problems that you might have missed. All right, for the first one, it says that we need to write and solve an algebraic equation. And so I'm going to start by identifying what the variable is and what it represents. It tells us to find Calvin's original number, so we can pick whatever variable we want. I'm going to go ahead and use C, and that's going to represent Calvin's number. Okay, from there, it says that we are going to first add 3 to the number. So we're going to take Calvin's number and add 3 to that. Next, it says we're going to multiply that sum by 5. Since we want to make sure that the adding happens first, we're going to put that quantity in parentheses and then multiply by 5. Now it says to take that value and subtract 7 from it. So minus 7. And finally, that is going to be equal to 23. So equals 23. All right, so that is our starting equation. And from there, we can go ahead and solve. So a couple different options. I'm going to start by distributing the 5. Right over here, this means that we have 5 groups of C plus 3. So when I distribute, I'm going to multiply 5 times C, which would be 5C, and 5 times 3, which would be positive 15. And then I can bring down everything else, minus 7 equals 23. Okay, next I'm going to combine the constant terms. So I have positive 15 minus 7, or positive 15 plus negative 7, which would be positive 8. I'll go ahead and bring down everything else. 5C plus 8 equals 23. And now it looks like a regular two-step equation. So I'll subtract the constant from each side. That will give me 8 zero pairs. I'll have 5C left on the left side. And 23 minus 8 would be 15. Final step, I'm going to divide by 5 on each side to get C equals 3. And then it would probably be a good idea to just take this value and plug it back into our starting equation. So if we do 3 plus 3, that's going to be 6. If we take that and multiply by 5, 6 times 5 is 30, and 30 minus 7, that would in fact equal 23. And so that just confirms that Calvin's original number was equal to 3. All right, number 2, we need to figure out which equations have the same answer as 3x minus 9 equals 33. So I'm going to start by just solving that equation. 3x minus 9 equals 33. Pretty straightforward two-step equation. I'm going to add 9 to each side. So that's my 0 pair. And then I have 3x equals 42. And then finally divide by 3 on each side. We'll end up with 1x. And that will equal 14. So we're looking for any of the equations out of the multiple choice that are equal to 14. And we could also just say x equals 14. All right, we have two options. Option 1, we can solve each of the equations, or we can substitute in 14 and see if it works. So I'll start by just solving each of these, especially the first couple are pretty straightforward. We'll divide by 3 and get x equals 11, so that one will not work. Part B, I would add 3 to each side to get x equals 14. So that one will work. Okay, part C is a two-step equation. I'm going to give myself just a little bit more room. And we'll add 3 to each side. So 3x equals 33. Divide by 3 to get x equals 11. So part C, that one would not work. Part D, I can go ahead. For this one, I'm going to just substitute in 14. If I do 14 plus 3, that's 17. And 17 times 3 is definitely not equal to 11, so that will not work. And then part E, 14 minus 3 is 11. And then when I do 3 times that amount, I get 33. So that one would work. This one's not equal to 11. Part E would work. So I would select that one. So final options for this, I have B and E. If you missed any of these, be sure you go back and fill in the correct steps to show either why or why each one doesn't work, whether it does or not. All right, part 3, which expressions are equal to that expression? I'm going to combine like terms. So Q plus Q plus Q is 3Q, and P plus P is 2P. So I need any of the ones that equal 3Q plus 2P. All right, part A, that one's going to simplify down to 3x plus 2y, which is definitely not equal to 3Q plus 2P. Those have different variables. Okay, then part B, I'm going to distribute. So 2 times P is 2P plus 2 times Q plus Q. That's going to become 2P plus 3Q, which does match the original, so part B would work. Okay, on part C, I have 1, 2, 3 P's and 2 Q's, which is kind of the reverse of what I want, so part C would not work. Part D, those are just in a different order, so that one would work. 2P plus 3Q is the same as 3Q plus 2P. Part E, I need the coefficient on Q to be 3, not P, so E does not work. And then on part F, we can distribute 3Q plus 3P minus 1P. This part would combine to be 2P plus 3Q, and that would work. That's going to be the same. So again, just like the last one, if you missed any of these or didn't select all of them, be sure you show the steps to show how that does work. All right, part 4, we are on to solving equations. So we're going to solve the equation and then we're going to show a check. All right, part A, we will begin by canceling out the constant. And I can add 3 on each side to make that happen. So I have 20 equals negative 4k, and then divide by negative 4 on each side to get 1k equals negative 5. Then for the check it step, we're going to plug in that value. Negative 4 times negative 5 minus 3. Okay. So negative 4 times negative 5 is 20. And 20 minus 3 does equal 17. So that works, and I know that negative 5 is the correct answer. Part B, I'm going to start by adding 4 to each side. So I have 2k equals 16, and then after dividing by 2, I get 1k equals 8. And then just like before, we're going to substitute that in. 2 times 8 plus negative 4, we're going to make sure that that equals 12. 2 times 8 is 16, and 16 plus negative 4 is 12. So that works, and I know that 8 is the answer to the equation. Okay, next, part C. C and D, we just have some decimals in there. Works the same way. So I'm going to start by subtracting 10 and 2/10 from each side. So this is a 0 pair. I'm left with negative 8y. And then since these have different signs and I'm subtracting, I'm going to put 10.2 on top and then subtract 1.4. So that's going to come out to negative 8 and 8 tenths. Okay, now we can divide by negative 8, and I get y equals positive 1 and 1 tenth. Then we'll go ahead, plug that in. 10 and 2 tenths minus 8 times 1 and 1 tenth should equal 1 and 4 tenths. So right here we have 10 and 2 tenths minus 8 and 8 tenths. And if we line that up, that does come out to 1 and 4 tenths on both sides. All right, part D, I'm going to start by subtracting 20.4 from each side. So 0 pair there, and I'm left with 6, or 6 and 0 tenths, equals negative 3, and be sure you bring down the negative. And then we'll divide by negative 3 on each side, and 6 divided by negative 3 is equal to negative 2. Okay, we'll plug that in. 26.4 hopefully equals 20.4 minus 3 times negative 2. So this part right here, negative 3 times negative 2 is positive 6. 20.4 plus 6 is 26.4, and that's exactly what I wanted it to be. All right, next up, part E and F, we have the distributive property to use. So 7 groups of y plus 5, we can think of it as multiplying through by negative 7. So negative 7y minus 35, remember negative 7 times positive 5 equals negative 42. Add 35 to each side. This has different signs and we're adding, so we're actually going to subtract the absolute values. That's going to be negative 7. And then we'll divide both sides by negative 7 to get y equals positive 1. Then when we check it, negative 7 multiplied by 1 plus 5 will hopefully equal negative 42. So we'll follow order of operations. We don't need to distribute on the check it step. And negative 7 times 6 is negative 42. So that will work. All right, part F will distribute on the right-hand side. So 5 groups of R is 5R. 5 times negative 6 is negative 30. And then we can add 30 to both sides. So these have different signs, so it'll come out to negative 5 equals 5R. And then divide by 5, and we end up with negative 1 equals R. All right, let's test that. So negative 35 equals 5 times the quantity of negative 1 minus 6. So negative 1 minus 6 is the same as negative 1 plus negative 6, which is negative 7. And 5 times negative 7 is negative 35. All right, next up, parts G and H have some fractions, but the steps are still the same. So I'll start with canceling out the constant. We'll subtract 3/8 from each side. So that's all 0 pairs. So you have 1/2 n equals 4/8. And I can see that 4/8 actually simplifies down to 1/2. So I'm going to replace that with 1/2. Okay, now to cancel out multiplying by 1/2, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, which is just 2, or 2 over 1. So that cancels to 1, so we just have n, and 1/2 times 2, or half of 2, is also 1. So we can go ahead, plug that back in, 1/2 times 1 plus 3/8. We'll see if that equals 7/8. So 1/2 times 1 is 1/2. And 1/2 can also be rewritten as 4/8. And 4/8 plus 3/8 is equal to 7/8, so that will work. All right, part H, we're going to subtract 1/6 from each side. So negative 5/6 minus 1/6 is negative 6/6 equals negative 1/3 x. Negative 6 divided by 6 is the same as negative 1, so I'm going to substitute and replace that with negative 1. Okay, now on both sides I can multiply by the reciprocal, negative 3/1, or just negative 3. So this all simplifies down to 1. We have 1x equals 3. All right, plug that back into the original equation, negative 1/3 times 3 plus 1/6 should equal negative 5/6. Okay, negative 1/3 times 3, if you want, you can put the 3/1. That's going to simplify down to negative 1. Negative 1 can be rewritten as negative 6/6. And when we add 1/6 to that, you will get negative 5/6. So we know that 3 is the correct answer. All right, moving on to some word problem ones. Cell phone company charges a monthly fee, and they also charge $7.50 for each gig of data. So when we're doing a word problem, we always want to start by defining our variable. It says how many gigs of data did you use? So we could pick a variable. I'm going to do G for number of gigabytes used. Okay, since we have $7.50 for each gig, that's going to be represented with the term $7.50 multiplied by the number of gigabytes. Then it tells us that we have a monthly fee of $25, and then altogether that equals $47.50. So that's what our starting equation would look like. Then from there, we can cancel out the constant by subtracting $25 from each side. Be sure you line up your decimal points. So we'll get $7.50 times G equals $22.50. And then the last step would be to divide by $7.50 on each side. Okay, once you do that, the left-hand side is going to simplify out to 1G. And the right-hand side, when we divide, we're actually going to get whole number 3. So lastly, we're going to put units on it. That's going to be 3 gigabytes of data used. Okay, it does also say write your answer in a complete sentence. So we can just say something as simple as you used 3 gigabytes of data. All right, next, very similar idea, except this time we have a taxi cab company. We still want to start with our variable. How many miles did you travel? So we can say M represents number of miles traveled. So your question will always tell you what to use as your variable. All right, we have a flat fee of $4.50. And on top of that, we're going to add in 35 cents per mile. So 35 cents multiplied by the number of miles, which we're going to use M to represent that. Altogether, that equals $10.10. So we'll start by canceling out our constant. We'll subtract $4.50 from each side. So that's our zero pair. And we'll be left with 35 cents times the number of miles will equal $5.60. Okay, last step, we're going to divide by 35 cents on each side. So this is going to simplify down to 1, or just m. And then when we divide $5.60 by 35 cents, you're going to get 16. M was number of miles, so we're going to add on 16 miles. So final statement, we can just say you traveled 16 miles. All right, next up we're going to look at an inequality. Just like the last ones, it still tells us to define our variable. The part that we don't know is how many songs. That's our thing that could change. We know exactly how much she spent. We know how much the CD is, but we don't know how many songs she bought. So we'll start with S equals number of songs. All right, each song was $1.30, so that's what's going to get multiplied by the variable. And then we also have to add in the $11 that she spent as a flat fee. Okay, altogether that needs to either be less than or equal to 24, because she only has $24. She can't go over that amount. All right, so that's part A. We're going to continue. Part B is just solving. So we can subtract 11 from each side. So we have $1.30 multiplied by the number of songs needs to be less than or equal to 13. Okay, then we can go ahead and divide by 1 3/10. So this would just become 1s, and that's going to need to be less than or equal to 10. So I'll have 10, and then we'll go ahead and add in units, which would be songs. Okay, interpret the solution in the context of the problem. We can say something like, Mary can buy up to 10 songs. So she doesn't have to buy all 10. Anywhere between 0 and 10 would work with her CD. Okay, when graphing the solution, would you use continuous or discrete graph to represent that? You are not allowed to buy part of a song. It's not like you can go online and just say, yeah, I just want the first third of the song, or I just want the chorus. You either buy the song or you don't. So that tells us that we're going to have a discrete variable, which means we're going to use a set of points. So we can say, when graphing this solution, use a set of points to represent the discrete variable. And obviously you can have your own words for this, but this would be an example of what you could write. And then we'll go ahead and actually graph what that looks like. Since S is less than or equal to 10 songs, we'll have our number line, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then we're going to use a set of points. So we're going to have dots at 10, 9, and 8. Be sure you include this graph. This will be one of the things we check for when we're looking at reviews to make sure that you've added everything. All right, getting close. Last ones, we're just going to solve these two inequalities. So very similar process to what we had for the two-step equations. This time we're just going to have a graph at the end. Okay, so we're going to subtract 5 from each side. So we have 2x equals negative 16. Actually, that is less than negative 16. And then divide by 2 on each side to get x is less than negative 8. So we'll go ahead and set up the number line. Be sure that your numbers are going in this order. Remember, you're counting back to 0, so it's going to be going down in absolute value. Okay, x is less than, so we're just going to use an open circle, and we're going to have it point to all the numbers that are smaller than -8. So that's what that graph would look like. All right, part B, we'll start by adding 26 to each side. So here are 0 pairs. 16 plus 26 is going to be 42. So 42 is greater than -4x. And then we're going to divide by the coefficient, which is -4. So we have -4 divided by -4 is 1. So we're just left with x. And then 42 divided by 4, we can go ahead and work that out. We'll need a decimal. 4 goes into 25 times. So our final value would be -1 and 5/10. Since I divided by a negative, be sure that you flip your inequality. So now instead of greater than, it's less than. And then to graph this, I want to have -1 and 5/10 kind of in the middle here. So I'll count by halves so that they're all spaced equally. I'm going to actually flip it and rewrite it so that it's x is greater than -1 and 5/10. So now I have an open circle, and greater than is going to go off to the right. All right, thank you for watching. Again, be sure you filled in all of the steps for anything that you missed, and good luck studying for your test.